Now I'd like to welcome Carl Lindquist as our next speaker. Carl is the Executive Director of the Superior Watershed Partnership, SWP, an award-winning Great Lakes nonprofit organization that serves communities in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. Carl has served on numerous regional, state, and international bodies, including 2 terms as the U.S. Chair of the Lake Superior Binational Forum. Carl will speak to us about his organization's work with local governments and organizations in integrating climate adaptation into watershed planning initiatives here in the Upper Peninsula. Carl?
So here's a map of the Great Lakes watershed, and the Upper Peninsula highlighted. That's our service area. So we do a lot of our work here in the greater Marquette area. I have a confession to make that I've lived in the UP about 25 years, but I grew up down in this area in southern Wisconsin. So I got a quick story. One time, my dad and I were driving up a hill near our house, long, straight, pretty steep hill. We'd been up that hill many, many times. And I was a teenager, and this time he decided to tell me that it was a watershed divide, and that a drop of water on this side of the hill goes down into Lake Michigan and out to St. Lawrence, and a drop on the other side of the hill goes into the Mississippi and down to the Gulf of Mexico. And that blew my mind. It literally blew my mind, and I never looked at the world quite the same way. And I think that's a powerful thing that Great Lakes cities and St. Lawrence cities can do, is educate people about their watersheds. I was happy to know years later, long after our family home had been sold and my parents retired, I had our GIS computer guy pinpoint my family home, and it was within about a quarter mile of the divide. That hill I was on was about 5 miles away, but I actually grew up in the Great Lakes watershed. I would have been sad if he said, well, your house was actually in the Mississippi watershed. Anyway, so talking about watershed awareness, I had my teenage son do an informal research project, but I think it's pretty powerful. If you query the New York Times and enter the word watershed, about 8 out of 10 times it'll come up as an adjective, as like a watershed political event or a watershed whatever event. If you query the Marquette Mining Journal, which covers the whole Upper Peninsula, about 8 out of 10 times it comes up as a noun. And what I'm arguing is that here in the Upper Peninsula, we are, I think, a little more watershed aware, and I would say that's true of many of these Great Lakes communities, that we're a little more watershed aware just living in the Great Lakes, but also as mayors and city representatives as far as educating our constituents about watersheds. So there's a map of the UP. Those are the communities we deal with. And the political units, the counties, the townships, over 150 townships. Many of them have different zoning. And about 20 communities that we work with. Well, there are the watersheds of the Upper Peninsula. But here's the real story. There are 3 Great Lakes watersheds in the UP. The UP is a pretty unique place. And so the green all drains to Lake Superior, obviously, the red to Lake Michigan, and the purple over to Lake Huron. This little bit of white, called Watersmead, it drains to the Mississippi. So that's how we approach things. And now I'm going to talk about how watersheds and watershed management and city management go hand in hand. And that's, when you put the two together, it's really powerful, and you can really make some change. And but separate, they're not as effective. on any environmental issue and even addressing climate change. And so this is another national study on climate change, and as I assume everyone can read it, but substantial adaptation planning is occurring. However, few measures have been implemented. And again, I would say the Great Lakes may be an exception to that, but that's a national study. And in general, I agree with it. Lots of planning going on, a lot of climate adaptation planning occurring, but are we seeing enough implementation? And our organization is really focused, we do a lot of planning, but it's only to get to implementation. If you just do planning and you don't get to implementation, well, we all know what value that has. So anyway, here's Marquette. Again, this city it's a small city, 21,000 people, but we have 4 major watersheds within the city. People are aware, this is something that went out in a utility bill years ago. What watershed do you live in? And raising awareness about that. School kids understand that. We're also aware that we share watersheds with other cities. This is the Carp River watershed. It's a Great Lakes area of concern. But the mouth is in the city limits of Marquette. Our wastewater treatment plant is there. But we have 2 other cities upstream. So that's another thing this organization, the Great Lakes Cities, is very good at, is raising awareness. I mean, it really helps cities communicate together, share best practices, and understand that we all share these watersheds. And I'll get back to that point at the end. So, yes, we develop watershed management plans. We get those approved by EPA. But what more important, we use those to identify projects and then get them implemented. So we've worked with the city of Marquette a lot over the years on stormwater management, obviously concern for all Great Lakes cities. More important, just as important, stormwater education. We're constantly raising awareness about stormwater. For instance, we have 3,000 storm drains in the city. They all drain to Lake Superior. A lot of people used to think that it goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and I think a lot of your citizens may think that, oh, it goes down that drain and it gets treated. So we raise awareness about that, and then we continue to raise awareness. Anything we can do, it's not like you educate about stormwater and then stop. You have to just keep doing it. I don't know if you can read that, but when you treat the lawn, remember you're not just treating the lawn. Try to get attention however we can. Done a lot of work on green spaces, protecting and restoring riparian buffers. I'll go through some of these quicker. A lot of work on coastal wetland restoration. This is a project that just went in last year. Took tons of scrap metal and concrete out of that area and restored it to a Great Lakes coastal wetland, which it once was. A lot of dune restoration and coastal work. On the tour tomorrow, if you take the waterfront revitalization tour, you'll see this project where the city was able to resurrect this river that had been in a culvert for over a century in an old rail yard, and now it's a beautiful park area and reused development. A lot of habitat work. We have healthy populations of brook trout and brown trout in our city streams. I'm mentioning all these projects because they fall under the climate adaptation umbrella. We didn't put these in, some of them, with the intention of addressing climate change. But what I'm saying, a lot of watershed restoration work, a lot of watershed protection work is also climate adaptation work. And you need to take credit for that in your communities. A lot of work we've done over the years with the wastewater treatment plant, we were able to achieve a 40% reduction in mercury in the effluent. Other things, we have an incredible network for pollution prevention. We even use a network of over 200 churches around the Upper Peninsula. Here in the UP, where we don't have the population to speak of, we've set national records on pollution prevention. This is the e-waste collection, collected over 300 tons in one day. That's an airport hangar that we had to rent to store it all. The same thing with pharmaceuticals, over a ton in one day. Household hazardous waste, over 30 tons in one day. And that, I think, comes back to being watershed aware and being, aware of your Great Lakes. Just quickly, I wanted to talk about energy conservation. It's something we've done with the city of Marquette. Those are all the cities in Michigan that were funded. Michigan led the state in the percentage of citizens signing up and the amount of greenhouse gas reductions based on that. And we do a lot to promote alternative energy. So that's just a quick listing of some of the projects, but I'm going to bring it to our climate plan, which is the main thing I'm talking about. And so as you all know, Lake Superior creates its own weather. Those of us who live here have known that for quite some time. This is the thermometer in the Keweenaw, where in the late 70s they received over 390 inches of snow in one winter. And we all know that's been changing, but I agree with John that there are some weird exceptions that we've seen as well. So we developed the Lake Superior Climate Adaptation, Mitigation, and most importantly, Implementation Plan. And what we did is we did it on a watershed level and we did it on a regional level. And that was an attempt to, at the current pace that planning is going, we just weren't patient enough to do it community by community. So we realized, working with groups like GLISA that John mentioned, by gathering the data that's out there, it's pretty much true for all of these communities in the Lake Superior watershed. It's definitely not true if you drive over the watershed, which you'll not even know you're doing. When you get in the Lake Michigan watershed, it's a different story, and that's what we're going to plan that one next. I shouldn't say you don't even notice. So many times I've come back from visiting family in Wisconsin, and just as I know I'm about to cross the watershed, I see the weather hanging over Lake Superior, and I just mention that because it makes sense for me, but it makes sense for these communities as well, and that they have a plan for their Lake Superior communities, and it lays out the framework for how to start addressing climate adaptation. What we did is take these general recommendations, and for Marquette, we went and highlighted the ones that have been implemented or in the process of being implemented. And that's another point I come back to, that a lot of your communities are already ahead of the game. And then lastly, what we provided in that plan was economic data. And we worked with a group called Headwaters Economics. And we realized that some local decision makers, some politicians, and others, the environmental information may not be enough for them to make a decision to move towards more climate adaptation. So the economic data can often be more compelling for those people. And so we have a lot of information on how climate can impact tourism, which is a big part of our economy, and also the forest product industry. And they also have recently completed this study showing economic vulnerability based on climate change. And the darker the county, the more vulnerable. And you'll notice that many of them are the northern counties of the Great Lakes. And we're aware of that. So getting close to wrapping up here, one thing that the UP has always been called very independent. That's why it tried to secede about 3 different times. And this is part of the reason. The city of Ironwood is further from our capital in Lansing than Lansing is from Washington, D.C. It's a big state. And so some of the remote efforts of providing planning assistance to communities, climate adaptation planning, they're great to a point. You can do webinars, you can do conference calls, but what really helps is meeting face to face. We're able to go anywhere in the UP, meet with people, look at a project, and be back in our office the same day. And that's stretching it as a service area. So the cities are really the most practical, coupled with watersheds. That's the real way to address climate change and really reach a lot of people. And so, here are not all of the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence cities member cities. It's most of them, and I apologize we couldn't fit the St. Lawrence on there. You're growing so fast our GIS guy couldn't put all the dots on. So if you take what I'm saying seriously about not only moving your city further towards climate adaptation, but also thinking about your neighbor cities and the watersheds you share, suddenly your impact is a lot bigger than just the footprint of your cities. And when President Obama was here in town, he recognized that small cities have a role to play. And lastly, what if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? So my point is, restoring your watersheds, making them more resilient, is going to be a step in the right direction towards climate adaptation. Thank you.